Welcome to another video from the Mystical Convert. Today we are going to tackle a complex topic: why polygamy was tolerated in the Old Testament but no longer allowed or tolerated in the New Testament, and what happened when modern societies adapt to modernism and throw away biblical teachings regarding marriage. Today we'll analyze what happened to those societies, but first of all, we need to understand what is the definition of polygamy.
If you look at the word-for-word definition of polygamy, it states, the practice of having more than one spouse at the same time.
Even in the Old Testament, if you look back at Genesis, it is clearly stated that God created Adam and Eve. If he intended polygamy to be righteous, he could have created 15 Eves and populated the world faster, but he did not do that. He only created one man and one woman because it was explicitly stated that a marriage was only to be held between one man and one woman, not multiple partners.
Speaking on that, you can look at 1 Corinthians 7 verse 2, and it states, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. And that clearly shows that a wife must have a husband and a husband must have one wife.
Because think about this. In a marriage, you're supposed to give your entire person to that spouse that you're getting married to.
And even in Genesis 2 verse 24, it states, therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. That is the definition of marriage. How can you have 5 people becoming one flesh?
We can also use this analogy. It is clearly stated in the 10 Commandments that you are only supposed to serve one God, because when you have multiple, you will serve one more than the other. And this also applies to a marriage. When you have multiple partners, you will love the other and despise the other one. So it is not possible for humanity to have multiple wives or multiple husbands in a relationship. Well, you might read the Old Testament and you might say, well, polygamy was practiced very commonly in the Old Testament, and here's the reason why. In the Old Testament, society was very different compared to what society is in 2026, because in the Old Testament, the king's son will get married to another kingdom's daughters, and that is how they would form alliance, and that is how they would form relationship between the two kings. So to form that relationship, they would give their son away to their daughters or give their daughters away to their sons. So that is one of the reasons why Solomon, David, we can go way back to Abraham, why they have so many wives. For King David's perspective and Solomon's perspective at that time, when you have many wives, it means you have a lot of power at that time.
Even though it meant a lot of power, it was still the reason why a lot of people fell. Like Solomon, he had so many wives, he had so much power, but because he did not obey what God told him, he fell.
One thing I really love about the Old Testament and how amazing God is, if you read the Old Testament, there isn't a commandment explicitly stating do not commit polygamy. There is none, because God meets you where you are. Now imagine this. You are in kindergarten. Do you expect your professor to give you college level mathematics?
Of course not. It will be way too hard for your level.
That's right. So he gives you the mathematics that is adaptable to your current stage. And that is how God works as well. Instead of expecting something that is impossible for humanity to achieve in that specific moment, God meets us where we are and prepares us for the new covenant. If you study the Old Testament in depth, it is a preparation for the path of Jesus Christ and for the new covenant.
But I've heard a lot of people comparing a marriage to a contract. But in reality, in the Catholic Church, marriage is still a sacrament. It is something which is very, very good to receive, but it's nothing like a contract.
No, it is not. Because in today's world, you go to a courthouse, you sign the contract, you get married, and if both parties agree to have an open marriage, then you can have the open marriage because it's just a piece of paper. But that is not at all how marriage works and how society treated marriage in the past. Because marriage is a sacrament, holy matrimony. It is a sacrament. It is not a piece of paper. Now you can use this example. Let's say you use YouTube, and the YouTube's terms and conditions, you have to agree to it before it allows you to access the services that it provides. That is similar to how holy matrimony works and the sacrament of marriage. When you get married, God gives you a contract, and one of the rules in the contract is that you have to be open to procreation. There are many rules, but one of them is you have to be open to procreation. So we should not think of marriage as, well, if I agree to have an open marriage, let's have an open marriage, because it is not your place to say, it is God's place to say. And our bodies is the temple of the Holy Spirit. So we should think of marriage as not just a contract forged by your local courthouse, but a covenant created by God. And this covenant cannot be ended, not even by the Pope, until death.
The church allows an annulment. An annulment meaning that there was something missing from the beginning of the marriage. So like if you were to take two parties and they were to say their vows, like let's say you have to be open to procreation and to have children. If the husband agrees to it, but in reality is like, no, I don't want children, then both of them get into a big thing. Then they get a divorce, a civil divorce. But in the church, they want to get a formal annulment.
Well, even if you are married and you are married under the sacraments and you did everything correctly, the church allows you and encourages you, if you are in an abusive marriage, to get a legal separation. Now, a legal separation and a sacramental separation is very different. The sacrament of holy matrimony can never be separated, but you can get a legal separation if you're in an abusive marriage, or if there are situations in the family that we cannot cover in this video. So if there are certain circumstances that force you to get a legal divorce, basically on paper it will say Jack and Jill is divorced, then legally on paper you guys are divorced. But in the eyes of the church and in the eyes of the Lord, you guys are not divorced, because the sacrament of holy matrimony cannot be broken until death.